Hey there, it's Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball Podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. David Cobb is here with me. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what to do. To the like button. Shouts to Brandon Davies. And if you're not yet subscribed to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel, please also do that while you're here. Let's get into it. I wanted to sit down with David Cobb this morning, in part because he handles our transfer rankings for CBS Sports, updates in real time whenever we need him. He stays super busy. So what I did is I asked him last night to take a look at my top 25 and 1, version 27. I hope you're up to date. And tell me, I want him to tell me who's too high, who's too low, so on and so forth. Among the too highs, he said, let's just start right at the top. His answer, number 1, Kansas. So let's start there, David Cobb. Thank you for being here, first and foremost. Why do you hate Kansas?
Well, Gary, it's more like, why do you love Kansas? People talk about you being a Boilermaker. They talk about you. What are you this year? I heard you've made your declaration already. What are you?
I don't know that I've decided yet. I might need to wait till December.
Okay. Well, anyway, I just feel like you're always really high on Kansas. For some reason, you're obviously very high on Kansas already for this year. You got them at number 1 in your top 25 and 1, even though they're coming off of arguably one of their worst seasons under Bill Self. So number 1, man, it just seems really, really high for Kansas. So really, I think for me, it's like you can just look at it like they almost performed a trade. You know, they lost Kevin McCullough, Johnny Furphy, Nick Timberlake. They add in Rylan Griffin, AJ Storr, and Zeke Mayo, and a couple of freshmen. And they also lost Parker Brown. So I think they upgraded. They upgraded. That's clear. But I don't know that they've upgraded to the point where I'm ready to declare them the number 1 team in the country.
Okay, so first to address the allegation, why are you always so high on Kansas? For the same reason I'm typically high on Duke in all of the years under Mike Krzyzewski, because they're always good. Like the Wikipedia page exists. I would invite anybody to go look at it. Kansas has been under Bill Self, if not the most reliable program in America. Certainly among the most reliable programs in America. So it starts there. But, I really do think let's just go through a projected starting lineup. It starts with DeJuan Harris. This is a guy who feels like he's been starting forever. He might not ever be a first-team All-American or even a second-team All-American, but he's a rock-solid, steady lead guard who has, quite literally won a national championship. I feel like you're where you want to be at that position. AJ Storr is a guy who just averaged nearly 17 points per game in the Big Ten for an NCAA tournament team at Wisconsin. He's got size, so he's going to give you size. Only 6'7", so you're going to have size on the perimeter there. Rylan Griffin is a guy who just averaged more than 11 points per game for a Final Four team. He's a 6'6" wing, shot nearly 40% from three-point range, and that was on more than 5 attempts per game. So you add size and shooting on the wing there. KJ Adams, he's been starting for 2 seasons. I think 68 combined starts over the past 2 years, averaged 12.6 points per game, 4.6 rebounds per contest last season. And in the middle, the All-American, 18 points, 11 rebounds, Hunter Dickinson. I understand it's not perfect. You've got KJ Adams at the 4, not really a stretch threat at all. That's not ideal. Dickinson obviously is flawed defensively. That's been highlighted for years now. But when you get that starting 5, it's 5 guys who could all be all conference level players. You've got multiple top 50 freshmen coming off your bench. Elmarco Jackson's a heralded high school prospect who will now be in his second year of college, averaged nearly 19 minutes per game last season. You mentioned Zeke Mayo. That's a guy who shot above 39% from 3 on 6.7 attempts per game at South Dakota State last season, averaged 18.8 points. To have that kind of scoring and shooting off your bench is obviously advantageous. For what it's worth, and maybe not much, but for what it's worth at FanDuel, Kansas and UConn are currently listed as the co-favorites to win the national championship at plus 1,000. So I'm at least in line with the betting markets, but I don't know that it's clear cut. Like our friend John Rothstein, he's got Alabama number 1 right now. So you can go with other options. Certainly nothing crazy about just giving the benefit of the doubt to the 2-time and reigning national champion UConn Huskies. But I went Kansas, perhaps because I am 40% Jayhawk.
Yeah. Here's where I'm worried about Kansas.
Mhm.
The perimeter defense a little bit, because Kevin McCullough rated as their best defender, according to Evan Mia, even better than, Hunter Dickinson, who at least in theory as a 7-footer should be really impactful, but maybe wasn't as often as they would have liked. So obviously Kevin McCullough was out and they had to get used to life without him for a decent chunk of the final stretch there last season, but he's altogether gone now. And then you go and look at where AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin ranked on their respective teams defensively. They were trending towards the bottom. And Zeke Mayo is a little bit undersized. He wasn't like the Summit League Defensive Player of the Year or something here. And now he's going to be guarding Big 12 players. So just a little concern there for you to plant a seed of doubt in your mind, GP, about Kansas, so that, maybe like, what would it take? What would it take at this stage in the offseason when all the dust is mostly settled in the portal? Like what would have to happen for you to usurp Kansas as the number one team in your top 25-1?
Like if Alabama were to add another big piece, I could see myself adjusting for that. If Houston were to add a big piece, I could see myself maybe adjusting for that. UConn, like if UConn, and I don't know that UConn's even in a position to add another big piece, but if for whatever reason someone became available and UConn was an option, I could certainly see myself just sort of settling on it's UConn, it's Dan Hurley. They've won back-to-back titles. Nobody thought they were going to do it 2 years ago. They did. Heading into last season, people didn't think they were going to repeat. They did. I'm just going to go with them. I could see that. But at this point, as of June 4th, 2024, I think it's clear in my mind, at least, that Kansas has the best roster as of this moment. And I'm skeptical that anybody is going to have a better roster by the time we get to opening day of the college basketball season.
Kelvin Sampson is there. He's there with a really good team.
Yeah.
He doesn't have Jamal Shedd, but he's got a really good team.
I mean, I think Houston, I don't have it right in front of me, but they returned something like 6 of their top 8 from a team that was obviously awesome up until the moment Jamal Shedd got hurt in the NCAA tournament. Losing an All-American, and not just an All-American, the lead guard who can, impact the game on both ends of the court, but also like your leader and the centerpiece of your program and like the guy who represents everything your program stands for. Like losing that is that's a big deal. But again, I'll just go back to one of the things you'll notice about my preseason rankings typically is that I do believe in people who have shown they can be trusted. I do believe in programs that are consistently excellent. Like, I don't know that Purdue really has one of the 15 best rosters in the country, but I know that Purdue is almost always one of the 15 best teams in the country. That they're reliable. So I'm going to have them there again. So, Houston in the top 5 is a little bit of that. Even when they lose Jamal Shedd, I still assume they're going to be great. The one thing that could impact all of this in the long run is like some of these teams, a lot of these really good teams, Kansas, Houston, Iowa, they're all in the same league. And so you could spend January, February, early March, them just beating each other's brains in where like, you could see somebody who rates or looks like the best team in the country, incapable of even going on a 4-game winning streak once they hit conference play because that league is so outrageous.
Yeah, but GP, they rigged KenPom by playing a bunch of schools in the non-con.
Yeah, I heard about that. I don't know that it was ever proven to me, but I certainly saw the clips. I saw the clips of people suggesting such things. Okay, let me ask you this then. Who would you have number 1? If not Kansas, who?
Probably Alabama or Houston.
Yeah.
Mark Sears coming back with what they also added. Plus, you get Grant Nelson back. So, like, to me, it feels like Alabama has the anchors of their rotation back, and then they also have a really good transfer class coming in. So, that's a Final Four team. They've proven it more recently than Kansas. Like, to me, there's just a little bit of doubt with Kansas because of the way last year went too. And now you have this reshuffled Big 12 that isn't getting any easier with Arizona coming in. So Houston sort of established itself to me as like the preeminent force in the Big 12 at this moment in time. And of course, Bill Self has all the credentials and firepower and NIL war chest needed to reclaim that superiority in the league. But I just look at a Houston team that returns so much. And yeah, they lose Jamal Shead, but they've got more continuity than just about anybody else in the country, even with Jamal Shead gone. And then they bring in Milos Uzan to play point guard from Oklahoma, who is pretty well proven in that league. He can dish out the ball. And so I would either go Alabama or Houston. I haven't sat down to do a preseason ballot necessarily, but those would be two, the two on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, and they're both reasonable options. I think by the time we get to opening day, the preseason AP poll, it'll come out. I think Kansas will probably be number one, but not definitely. And it will not be unanimous. I don't think it'll be anything close to unanimous. And you'll see other teams get first place votes. And yes, I think Houston will be one of them. I think Alabama will be one of them. And I could see UConn being another. A team that is among the favorites to win the national championship, at least in the betting markets, and a team that might get first place votes in the preseason AP poll, that's Duke. I've got them ninth in the top 25 and 1 right now. In our text message exchange last night, you said you also like Kansas think that's a little too high. That is high. That is lower than where the betting markets would have Duke. Right now, I told you Kansas and UConn are co-favorites at plus 1,000 to win the 2025 NCAA tournament. After that, it is Duke and Alabama at plus 1,200, then Houston at plus 1,800, then Baylor at plus 2,000. Why are you skeptical of Duke? Is it just the obvious? They're undeniably young.
Yeah, and this is the last year of the COVID year, so we're still going to have all these 5th and 6th year guys around the sport this year, and Duke's going to be out here playing around an 18-year-old freshman, Cooper Flagg. And if he's not ready to be a star, I mean, are Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, I mean, are they ready to step up? I hadn't seen enough from those guys yet to make me believe that they can pick up the slack if Cooper Flagg isn't like a first team all ACC out of the chute type of guy. So a lot of concerns with Duke in that realm. I mean, I know it wasn't all that long ago that RJ Barrett and Zion Williamson and that freshman oriented Duke team took them pretty far, but a lot has changed even in those few years since then. So I do have questions about Duke's youth and about centering a roster, a national championship level roster around a freshman in this year.
I understand the skepticism of Duke. I have them in the top 10 because that's where they live. And they've consistently reliable program. And I know there's been a coaching change in recent years there, but John has done a nice job since replacing Kay. He's obviously incredible at roster building. He's going to have, if not the most talented roster, and I mean talented in terms of like NBA prospects and that type of stuff, if not the most talented roster in the country, one of the most talented rosters in the country. But like, I get it. You're right. A lot has changed since Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett were, flourishing in college basketball. We don't see teams built around freshmen, to operate consistently at the tip top of the sport too often anymore. And, if Duke is going to do that, it's going to be, wherever Duke goes, it'll be where Cooper Flagg takes him. And he's going to have to be great immediately at a very young age against very old players, to have the Blue Devils meet expectations. I'm a believer in the talent. I'm intrigued by the talent, but I certainly understand anybody else being skeptical of Duke as a legitimate national title contender as currently constructed. I understand that. I'm going to respect the talent, put them in the top 10 for now, but I do understand the skepticism. Gonzaga is another one you told me too high. I got the Zags at number 8. On one hand, they return every rotation piece besides Anton Watson from a team that did finish 12th at KenPom. On the other hand, even though they finished 12th at KenPom, it didn't feel like or look like they were that kind of team for much of the season last season. Famously, they didn't even have a quadrant 1 victory until pretty deep in the calendar.
Yeah, it looks to me like Gonzaga, as currently assembled, is the type of team that probably maxes out at that Sweet 16 again. I mean, and let's be clear here, there's no shame in the nation's longest Sweet 16, yes. Whatever. Like, if that's what it is, then so be it.
There are other proud programs out there who are like can we get to the Sweet 16 for the first time since boom? And like when we flip it and talk about Gonzaga, like I think that's maybe all they're going to be able to do is go back to the Sweet 16 for the millionth time in a row. It is interesting how it sort of gets taken for granted, and it never should.
Sure. Yeah. So I look at what they've done from a perimeter standpoint. It's actually pretty impressive. They got a nice group of skill, talent, perimeter players around Graham Ike. Ryan Nimhart and Nolan Hickman are back. And then Ajayi and Khalif Battle are two pretty high caliber transfer additions, the guys who have scored a lot of points. So I think they've bolstered the depth in that backcourt. Because if you remember a little bit last year when Steele Venters got hurt right before the season, they ended up having to play Dusty Stromer huge minutes as a true freshman, and they really didn't have anybody else off the bench. So I think Mark Few has solved that problem, but I don't know that I see a Gonzaga team with these pieces having the physicality, the athleticism, and like the high level potential future NBA player type of stardom needed to make that deep NCAA tournament run. So I think it's a good team. I also think the loss of Anton Watson is massive. Like he did a lot for them. I know he wasn't their leading scorer, but just in terms of efficiency and the on-off splits and all that kind of stuff, man, like Gonzaga really relied a lot on Anton Watson.
I want to ask you about one team before we get to like what schools have really flourished in the transfer portal that you think I've got too low, and that's Tennessee at number 13. Obviously, they lose some key pieces, Dalton Knecht being the biggest key piece. But I've got them in the top 15. You still think they should be higher. Tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, you just hate the Vols because you went to Memphis, right?
That's it. I can't stand them. Can't even look at the color orange. It is wild how much people think of it like that. And it is true. Like some people who are quote unquote Memphis fans or Memphis graduates are like, my kids would never go to Tennessee. Like if my kids wanted to go to Tennessee, I'd be thrilled. I understand why people assume these weird things about where people went to school and what they care about. I'm just saying it's never been true with me. I've spent many nights in Knoxville. I've enjoyed them all. And I've known Rick Barnes for a long time. I like him quite a bit. And if the Vols, I look forward to them going to the Final Four for the first time in school history. And I do think that's going to happen at some point, perhaps under Rick Barnes, but very soon.
Some people think I hate Memphis too.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there was a time in my life where I didn't really like love Memphis, right? Like when I was in high school and like, there was that 1-versus-2 game, right? Like Pearl versus Calipari. And like my basketball team got together and me and one other kid were the only kids rooting for Tennessee. And so like in those moments, right? Like you don't love Memphis, but as I've gotten into this industry,
right,
over the last, decade plus now, it's like it's really not all that difficult to put your allegiances aside. It's not as difficult as people think.
It's not at all for me. And what you find out is, or at least my experiences over the years, is that you don't have these grudges or whatever bad not with schools. They're just schools are just things. But you get to know people at these schools or even fan bases at these schools, and you do root for certain people. And I don't know that I root against anybody, but there are people like I like to see this guy do well, or I like to see that staff do well.
Because it means something to somebody who means something to you.
There you go. Right. I root for people, and I don't really root against people that much. There are fan bases that I find annoying, and I don't mind it when their favorite team loses so much.
I think Tennessee can creep into that territory sometimes.
That is actually the one that people think here. This is the biggest misconception. Now that we're talking about this, people think you get to a point where you hate schools for whatever reason, and that's never true. You know what you start to hate because of social media? Fan bases. You start to get really aggravated by irrational fan bases, and you can, if we're being honest, start to maybe go, you know what? Wouldn't it be hilarious if they missed the NCAA tournament again? Wouldn't that be funny? And you can start to like enjoy that kind of stuff. But how about this? If that same school then hired somebody that I am wired to root for, I'd just take all that, set it aside, and be like, man, I hope he does well. I really don't get caught up in it as much as people think.
I had a moment of oh man, these Alabama fans, now that Nick Saban retired, like, this is going to be hilarious. And then immediately their basketball program makes the Final Four. So it's just, okay, like, all right, y'all win. Like, y'all are good. But now, yeah, so with Tennessee, your biases aside here.
Right, of course.
Yeah. I actually think they've done a really good job in the portal. And I don't think that was ever going to be too difficult for them because they had Dalton Connect to sell.
Right.
I mean, look at what this guy just did here. So no shock to me that they went out and got Darlin Stone-Dubar from Hofstra, who is a really high-scoring player in that league, who I think profiles very nicely as an SEC perimeter wing. And then they also, late in the game, landed Chaz Lanier out of North Florida, who was maybe the best three-point shooter in college basketball a year ago. Again, not a tough sell to a guy like that when you just saw Dalton Connect do what he did. You add in Felix Okpara from Ohio State. I think even though he's not going to be that first team all SEC performer like maybe Jonas Adu could have been, I think he's a lot tougher than Jonas Adu. And that's where Tennessee got burned late last season. When Tennessee had to go up against Zach Edey, there was not that anyone has an answer for him, but I think a guy like Felix Okpara is maybe at least a little better equipped physically to bruise and to battle with some of the better bigs in college basketball than a Jonas Adu. So Tennessee brings back Zakai Ziegler, Jemai Mashak, some of these guys who have been a part of that program for a while. I really like the portal class. So, yeah, I would maybe have Tennessee in the top 10 just kind of based off the offensive firepower that they added in the backcourt there. But, yeah, I mean, I'm not like egregiously mad at you for snubbing the ball.
Well, I appreciate that. I think there's a Tennessee fan here or there, I can't keep track, who is greatly offended by the 13 next to the Vols name, but perhaps they'll prove me wrong. On the Dalton Connect thing, you're exactly right. That's a big loss, but just the story of Dalton Connect has helped them reload in the transfer portal. I don't know if you saw Chaz Lanier's quotes, but like he specifically mentioned Dalton Connect, and not that they're the same exact type of player, but just in theory it's a great thing to be able to sell. Hey, here's this guy, he was a mid-major player, nobody thought he was an NBA prospect, he came to us for a year, we built everything around them, he took us deep into the bracket, he was the SEC player of the year, All-American, and now he's going to be a lottery pick. You can be the next one. Like that's a great story. Combined with the big NIL package, of course. Like that story gets you nowhere if you don't have NIL money to go with it. Then somebody with NIL money just says, here, you want $600,000 or whatever it costs. So, you got to have both. But having the Dalton Connect story to go hand in hand with NIL, I'll just take the young man at his word, seemed to register with him. He knows what Dalton Connect just did at Tennessee and thinks that he can maybe on some level be the next version of that. And so the Vols are going to be good again. Whether they should be preseason top 10, preseason top 15, we could debate if we wanted, but clearly they're going to be, and they have, just to circle back to the theme of who is consistently good, reliable under Rick Barnes. Since he got it going, Tennessee has been consistently good, almost without exception, and it looks like they're going to be able to continue that in the next season. Like I mentioned at the top, David Cobb has handled our transfer portal rankings all off season. So I'm going to ask him who's done the most, who's done the best in that space. We'll do that next. But first, let's get a word from our partners.
You hear that? It's the steady pulse of the world's game that's turning fans into family and sport into passion. You hear that? It's the heartbeat of American soccer. The USL on CBS Sports Network.
David Cobb, as the man who has handled the transfer portal rankings, I'll just keep it broad. What staff, and I know that first-year staffs, by design have to do more, or at least should have to do more than staffs who have been in place for a year or longer. But just broadly speaking, what staffs have done well in the transfer portal since we closed that 2023-24 season?
Yeah, I prefer gatekeeper of the transfer portal.
There you go.
My friends at your old station, 92.9, they gave me that, and I like it.
Okay, I would consider it, like, put it in a graphic, Nada.
Gatekeeper. As part of my gatekeeper duties, Missouri has caught my eye. So I didn't want to focus too much on the first-year coaches because they had to work the portal. Like, what choice did Mark Pope or John Calipari have?
Right.
And we can debate, which of those first-year coaches ended up with with the best class. Eric Musselman has a great class coming in at USC, and those are interesting debates, and we can have them if you want. But I think who actually got better from a year ago because they worked the portal, from this group of returning coaches in the sport. And I think obviously coming off of a winless SEC season, Dennis Gates is feeling the urgency, and that is reflected in the caliber of player that he's acquired, not just in the transfer portal, also with a great freshman class. But I mean, notably from the transfer side, I am very excited to see what Mark Mitchell does at Missouri. This is a former 5-star prospect, McDonald's All-American. He's part of the crop of players leaving Duke to make way for Cooper Flagg. But I still think there is a potential NBA player in there in Mark Mitchell. I think there is a potential all-SEC type of performer there with a guy who has that type of skill set, physical tools, can play the 3 or the 4. He's going to have the chance to shine at Mizzou this year. That's going to be fun. And then they brought in Marquise Warwick, big time, 4-time All Horizon League guy, right? Going to be playing his 5th year. Jacob Cruz, who like some people called this year's Dalton Connect because he's such a good shooter. So I'm excited to see that Missouri transfer class get together with that freshman class and see if they can't get that Dennis Gates era back on track.
Yeah, and there's real urgency there. Like when you go winless in league, there are some people who think there needs to be a change then. I'm not a believer in that. I can chalk up one bad year to just like one really, really bad year, but you can't do something like that 2 years in a row, and keep an SEC job. So there's urgency there to not just improve, but improve pretty dramatically quickly. It's a hard league to improve in. Like it's hard to go from the bottom even to the middle. But I agree. Dennis has done well this offseason to at least position himself to have a chance. One of the schools that has done well in the transfer portal and entered some people's top 25, but not quite mine yet, St. John's, Rick Pitino. What have they got accomplished?
Yeah, he's done a good job. I mean, now Kadary Richmond is the headliner of that group. I mean, he's an intra-conference transfer who basically put Seton Hall on his back and led them to the NIT title. He is a multi-dimensional, multifaceted type of player. So, yeah, he can score for you, of course, but just an incredible distributor, a gritty defender. He'll go crash the boards. There's really nothing that Kadary Richmond can't do. So I love that addition for Rick Pitino. And then they're still in the mix for Jameer Watkins, who is arguably the best player available in the portal right now. I mean, I think that debate is probably between Jameer Watkins, Coleman Hawkins, and Arthur Kaluma. I think those are probably the 3 best available in the portal. And St. John's still has a chance to add, to a class that already includes Kadary Richmond, who a lot of people have ranked number 1 in this transfer class. And then they picked up the point guard Smith from Utah and from Georgia Tech, who's played a lot of really quality high major basketball. So it's another situation where I think, Rick Pitino feels that urgency. He flipped that entire roster year 1, didn't quite get it done. Now he's refining and tweaking in a way that I think is going to get them to the NCAA tournament. You
mentioned a lot of people have Kadary Richmond number 1 in their transfer portal rankings. You've got Janelle Davis. I gather that's controversial in the transfer portal streets. It
could be. I mean, underlying metrics wise, like Kadary Richmond's off the charts. So, but okay, think about it. Like when we name a transfer player of the year, or whoever names a transfer player of the year this time next year, we get so drawn to points, right? Like that's almost always one of the determining factors in deciding things. All-American player of the year, region player of the NCAA tournament. Like, I don't know. Like, and I think John L. Davis is going to score a ton of points at Arkansas. I mean, unless John Calipari has a couple or 3 players up his sleeve for this next roster that we don't know about, like this thing is set up for John L. Davis to throw.
He might bring John L. Davis off the bench, though.
You really think that?
I mean, you never know. He brought Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepherd off the bench.
Okay, yeah. But based off the logic he used last year, that's actually a genuine concern.
I don't think he will, but like you never know.
Yeah, right. So he's going to start like Carter Knox and bring John L. Davis off the bench or something. I mean, okay. I just think John L. Davis is going to score a ton for Arkansas. And maybe, especially if St. John's ends up with Shamir Watkins, Kaderi Richmond might not even be their leading scorer, at St. John's, which I think he will be. But John L. Davis is a 40% three-point shooter on high volume. He's been to a Final Four, AAC Co-Player of the Year, just an offensive spark plug, and I think that's going to carry him to be the best transfer in the sport. One
other school, and then we'll get out of here, that I know you think has done well in the transfer portal. I think all of us believe they've done well in the transfer portal, and that's my beloved Indiana Hoosiers. I made a note throughout the season. I don't know if you've heard, but Indiana hasn't finished in the top 25 at KenPom since 2016. That's a crazy thing to say about a blue blood program. I can't even believe it. If I ain't looked it up 100,000 times, I wouldn't even believe it myself, but it's true. You think Mike Woodson's done enough in the portal to end that streak in the 2024-25 season? I think he probably has.
At least on paper, it appears you do. GP, you got him at 18, which that says that you're a believer.
I am a believer. I might be 40% Hoosier before this thing's over with, and wouldn't that be quite a plot twist?
What do you like about him? I mean, they lost Kellel Ware, but they added Umar Ballo.
Right.
And then they went out and got a couple of pretty good guards, Miles Rice and Kanan Carlisle. I mean, where are you at on this?
It's just listen, I don't know that it's a perfectly constructed roster. Some folks have noted shooting concerns. I can look at the percentages like everybody else. There are others who think maybe the percentages are a little misleading. Its shooting will not be an issue, although Mike Woodson's offensive philosophy, or at least Indiana's offensive philosophy under Mike Woodson, hasn't emphasized three-point shooting as much as other programs do and certain fans would like. But I'm a believer in talent, and you just look at that roster and you've got guys who have really it's an experienced roster filled with guys who have accomplished stuff, or at least proven to be high-level players on NCAA tournament teams or rotation pieces for programs who have done some nice things. So I'm a believer in the roster. Whatever my Indiana jokes were over the past year or so, I don't think I'm going to be able to use them as often as next season as I have in these past couple of seasons at least.
And they kind of snuck in a low-key transfer, Luke Goody from Illinois. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was just a bit player, but he played a lot at Illinois, but he's a good shooter. So I think that kind of helps assuage the concerns there, which are valid. I think at least on paper, Mike Woodson's given Indiana a chance to be an NCAA tournament team, maybe even more than that next season. Because the Big Ten, think about it, it's kind of undergoing a facelift, a makeover here. You got the post Zach Edey era at Purdue. You got an Illinois team that is totally revamped and retooled that won't really look the same at all. And now you add in the 4 West Coast members, and you got Wisconsin losing AJ Storr, and it just feels like there's a lot of moving pieces and maybe an opportunity there for Indiana to strike.
I wouldn't be shocked if we look up and Indiana is the projected Big Ten champ at some point in the season. Like right now, I think just glancing at it, I've got Purdue as the highest rated Big Ten team heading into the season, and that might just be giving Matt Painter the benefit of the doubt more than anything else. I mean, I've got Purdue 12th, Ohio State 14th, and I guess after that, Indiana 18th. So Indiana's top 3 in the Big Ten, according to me, as of this moment, and not that far from where I have the projected favorite, Purdue. And if you want to, there are plenty of people, I think reasonably, who will just be like, I've heard this, and I'm not ruling it out. Like those guards have been good, but largely, or at least in part because of the presence of Zach Edey. Take Zach Edey away from them, they don't get the looks that they've been getting. You're going to see them fall back a little bit. I don't know that that's true. In fact, I don't think that that's true. Evidence being that I've got Purdue in the top 15, but there are other people who believe that. And again, I wouldn't completely. I don't think it's a crazy thing to think.
So you don't have Mick Cronin, the greatest coach in UCLA history, represented in your top 25 and 1?
I do. They're at 19, one spot behind Indiana, so they would be 4th in the Big Ten heading into the season.
And you said that I was spaced out. Sorry.
No. I only did top 3, but it was UCLA right behind Indiana. So I've got 4 Big Ten schools in the top 20, and they would be Purdue, Ohio State, Indiana, and UCLA.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you got the Bruins ranked. I didn't mention them in our show prep, but I actually think Mick Cronin is in for a bounce back year. There's a lot of these coaches that are feeling the heat that have done a really good job with their rosters. Like I think Sean Miller and Xavier is another one we didn't get a chance to talk about, but they have loaded up on really good perimeter players. Like I think they get back to the NCAA tournament. Missouri feeling the pressure with Dennis Gates. Rick Pitino trying to make that second-year jump. Mike Woodson trying to save his job. And UCLA, Mick Cronin coming off of a bad year, a down year. I think he's done a really good job with his roster. So you got these coaches that are feeling the heat that I think have done a really good job with their transfer hauls.
And I think all of that's connected. And then we'll get out of here after this. You got coaches at big brands, or at least coaches who, in and of themselves, they're big brands, and they have rough seasons for whatever reason. Well, used to, it might be a little bit of a process to get this back to where you wanted to get it. But now with NIL money and transfer waivers and the portal filled up, like you can go and flip this thing in one off season. And when you have real job pressure on you to do it because you're coming off of a rough year, it motivates you to go out and find the money to get this stuff done. And I think you've seen that around the country this offseason, and you would know better than I because you're following this stuff every single minute of every single day, having to keep the transfer portal rankings. So just let me ask you this, and then we'll call it a day. Have you noticed that either coaches who are established and maybe coming off of rough years, or coaches who are just like under real job pressure, you've seen them do well in the transfer portal, and you think one thing probably led to the other?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think the frustration, the angst of like Sean Miller and Mick Cronin are two that come to mind, like two that you could just tell last year just weren't happy, that maybe to an almost unhealthy degree, like the success of their teams like dictates their comfort in day-to-day life. And now what they've done over the offseason is it gives them a chance to get right back immediately. And at UCLA, let me be clear too. I mean, part of that is roster retention, and bringing back Sebastian Mack and Dylan Andrews and Lazar Stefanovic. So that's key. But then you go out and get a Kobe Johnson and Eric Daly. Sky Clark might still have something in the tank and hit and finally pop. So I just look at that UCLA roster because this time last year, it was a whole bunch of like international freshmen and unproven guys. And it was Mick Cronin complaining a little bit about NIL. And so, Gary, you might know better than I do what changed there. But it may be as simple as what you said a second ago. It raises the urgency to go out and raise that money yourself.
Well, with Mick, it wasn't even like behind the scenes frustration. Like I can't tell you how many coaches I talked to, and they're like, I'm in a league and this other guy's got $5 million to spend on NIL, and I don't have anything close to that. And it's getting like, but that's all. The coach would never say that publicly. Mick was pretty public about, I don't have money to build a team. And if that doesn't change, this is going to be hard. You combine that with the conference change, and it seems pretty obvious to me that something changed at UCLA, and his very public pressure that he placed upon the program or the administration or the boosters or all of everybody under that umbrella, it seemed to have made a difference.
Yeah, and I'll put Xavier kind of in that boat too. Like Sean Miller, he's just so accustomed to winning and succeeding that when he doesn't, you can just feel that urgency ratchet up. And he's had a lot of success already in his first 2 years at Xavier with transfer guards. So I know he lost Desmond Claude, and that's a big loss, but he's more than made up for what they've lost by adding guys in the portal. So I think the Musketeers are in for a return to the Big East upper echelon. Like I think this could be a really, really nice season for Sean Miller.
Yeah, I've got Xavier 24th in the top 25 and 1 right now. So not projected to win the Big East, but certainly in the group of teams that are going to have an opportunity to do that. Let's get out of here. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to South Carolina. Shouts to Terry Teagle. He's a legend. Huck Larnell. And thank you guys once again for listening and watching the Eye on College basketball podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. There's more of us than there are of them. That needs to be reflected in the comments. So make sure you're doing that. David Cobb, thank you for getting up, spending this morning with me. We'll talk to all you guys again real soon.